Hi, I'm Kristen. Disrupting traditional management consulting through the power of AI technology is not just a movement, it's the heart of our mission. Here at Culturefy, we're empowering leaders and employees to take action. But more importantly, we're dedicated to creating work-life cultures that are world-changing. I'm so excited that you decided to join us today to be part of this roundtable discussion as we explore what's trending in HR. Welcome, everyone, and today we are talking all about Millennial and Gen Z priorities and how aligning organizational culture with these distinctive values can redefine your brand's impact on the next generation of the workforce. Now, if you're new to our series, we are here every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern and joined by a panel of subject matter experts and thought leaders. And today we have two leaders joining us who have a lot to say on the subject, and I'm excited to dive in. So first, I want to introduce Jessica Macon, who is a Global DEI Senior Manager at UPS. Jessica, thank you so much for being here. Would you care to say a few words as introduction?
Absolutely. I just want to start out by saying thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation with you all today. And as Kristen mentioned, I am a global DEI senior manager at UPS. I've been with the company for coming up 7 years now, and I reside in Atlanta, Georgia. I am a millennial mom of three. Just newly had my baby girl last year, so I'm really excited to come back to the workforce and show that work-life balance and really exemplify that in my day-to-day. And I know we're going to touch on some of that even in our discussion here today. I've held a variety of roles between marketing, HR, DEI, employee engagement. So I have quite a bit of perspective of some of the topics that we'll be discussing today. And yeah, I'm just super excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And, I did take a peek at our registrations, and I think we have a pretty good representation of UPS joining us today. So just a little plug. Absolutely. And just a little plug to everyone who is joining us live. Please take advantage of the chat. We also have a Q&A function, so please drop questions as they come up. We'll do our best to unpack some of those. So it's not just me asking our panelists these questions, but we're really excited to hear from everybody's experience, especially those who are joining live to enrich in this conversation. We also have another panelist, Amber Capish, who is the Chief of Staff to the Head of Human Resources at Varian, a Siemens Healthineers company. Amber, thank you so much for also joining us today. Would you care to share a little bit more about yourself?
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. And thank you for the Culturefy team for having us on board. And Jessica, I'm excited to chat alongside this topic with you. So a little bit quickly about me, Amber Capish. I reside also in Atlanta. I started my career in marketing, had about a decade-long career in marketing, started at Cox Communications here in Atlanta. I did a lot of social media, brand marketing, but during my time at Cox Communications, had the opportunity to sit on the Diversity Council as a millennial. And that really fueled my interest in employee engagement and really pricked my interest into transitioning into HR. So here I am at Varian, which we are part of Siemens Healthineers and have been for the last 3 years. I started my role at Varian in HR communications, so using that marketing background, and have transitioned into a more global perspective as the chief of staff to our head of HR. If you're not familiar with Varian, we are the oncology side of Siemens Healthineers, so we make radiation treatment devices and part of the medical device industry.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Amber. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with you both. Um, And as a reminder for those who are tuning in live, please join in. We want to hear from you guys as well. And to kick things off, today as I mentioned, we're talking about what millennials and Gen Zs are looking for when it comes to work-life culture and how brands can adapt these values to attract talent, enhance engagement, and drive performance. So there's a ton to unpack there. And just to set the scene a little bit, I'm not going to dive into this too much because I know I want to hear what Jessica and Amber's thoughts on all of this, and I know they'll go into much deeper. But just to set the scene a little bit, Why are we talking about this? Why is next gen workforce top of mind? Well, it's because we're about to head into a very significant generational talent shift as the baby boomer workforce begins retiring in larger numbers over really the next 5 years. And with Gen X smaller in size, really it's already happening that millennials and Gen Z are already beginning to shape the future talent strategies that we're beginning to see implemented. And of course, very soon we will see 6 generations in the workforce at the same time, which is crazy to me, but it's going to make these conversations all the more relevant. Um, and then, of course, when we're talking about different priorities and the next generation, of what the next generation is looking for in organizational culture, we can't not talk about the impact on brands. And at Culturefy, we do talk a lot about the fusion of brand and culture, where your brand is who you are, but your culture is your brand in action. So, as we're talking about these changing priorities today, shaping organizational culture, how companies respond will absolutely have an impact on their brand, both internally and externally. So, to kick off the conversation, Jessica, I'd love to kind of hand it off to you. So, when it comes to understanding these changing priorities, how are you seeing the priorities of millennials and Gen Z shifting from previous generations, and what impact is that having on talent acquisition and retention?
Absolutely. So I want to start out by saying first, although there are a lot of differences between the generations, there are also, a lot of similarities. I saw a quote not too long ago from Catherine Minshew, who's the co-founder and CEO of the Muse, and she said that the younger generations ask loudly for the things that everyone wants and have had less time being told that you can't have things. So they're less tolerant of some of those cultural norms that you can have, like waiting your turn and paying your dues and so to speak. So they're also less likely to suppress their own needs for the sake of the organization, like many of the other generations. So it's not necessarily that they want different things. They want some of those same things like work-life balance, flexibility, growth and development, some of those things that we're going to be talking about today in much more detail, but they just voice it differently and they demand it, I feel like. So it's going to impact how you acquire talent and how you keep talent because it's like the old saying, what got you here won't get you there. You're going to have to change and adapt to these new needs, and companies' approaches will have to change as well. Um, with all of the new things that are coming and being demanded by these new generations. So, being agile and speaking the language of these newer generations' values, as well as implementing practices and processes that appeal to the newer generations, are going to be extremely important. And I think what sets companies apart for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you're saying too about some of these things might seem radically different, but actually they're not. It's just maybe being voiced more in a different way. Because I think sometimes we're so quick to say us versus them when it comes to generations. And so finding that kind of balance of saying, actually, some of these values are similar. It's just being prioritized differently or voiced differently. Amber, what about you? What about thoughts from your side on what you're seeing? Anything to add there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I completely echo what Jessica said about this generation really being more similar to other generations than not. I have the opportunity to work very closely with our talent acquisition team here at Varian. And when I think about just what we're seeing, just even in the workforce, right? Common trends of what we're seeing around Gen Z and how these might differ just a little bit, and how it's impacting talent acquisition all over the world. The first is pay transparency. So there's this big push to see the fairness and the equity in payment. And I know that this has become a law in certain states around California and New York and Colorado. I think there's about 20 states now that have this as a law to be posting that general salary range. So I think pay transparency now more than ever is going to be key for this particular generation. The second is how entrepreneurial this generation is. So they grew up in this gig economy, this side hustle culture. And so there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. And something to be mindful of for hiring managers and talent acquisition is to really think holistically about the skills that you're recruiting for. So this generation might not have a linear career path. I know I personally don't have a linear career path myself, and I'm so grateful for that. This is the take a chance on me generation. So this generation comes with a wide variety of skills and soft skills and are very much willing to learn the hard skills, which we can talk about here throughout our time is how we develop that. A lot of transparency is asked from this generation. They want transparency around what the culture is and what the culture isn't. I know we'll talk about branding and advocacy, but these individuals, if they agree and align with the culture, can be your biggest brand advocates and almost be a recruitment force for your individual talent. I know in the past when I've shared stories of my workplace in a very positive light, I've had friends and, people that I know in my community say, gosh, I'd love to work where you work. It sounds like you love your job. And again, that this word of mouth marketing is huge for this generation and helping build your brand. And then last but not least, just having that tech savviness, that ability, that flexible work environment. I know a lot of questions come from this generation of, is there ability to work from my phone? Can I work from other locations? What does that look like? And I know we'll probably get into some life work balance, like Jessica mentioned, as being such a priority for this generation. But again, those are some of the top things that come to mind for me when recruiting specific talent when it comes to this generation.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, the take a chance on me generation. I love that. And I do think, thinking about all the things that this generation has gone through, even within the last 4 or 5 years, has really shaped our perspective on work through that entrepreneurship mentality, the gig economy that you mentioned, and bringing that perspective to more quote unquote traditional employment opportunities. I mean, there's a lot of value there of just having a team and a generation of people that think a little bit differently, even if their roles are more traditional. So how do we tap into that? I think that is really great insight there. Now, I also want to kind of dig into a little bit more. We talked a little bit about the huge talent gap that is coming, right? So, Amber, you mentioned it a little bit, but in light of, the retirement of baby boomers and the smaller Gen Z workforce that we're facing, what are some ways that you're seeing talent organizations begin to implement some of these priorities that you mentioned?
Yeah, good question. So I think we're all pretty familiar with the millennial way of working, and I'll touch on that too. But I think something I'd like to call out as we look at Gen Z specifically is we're seeing that this is a very intense generation. They're very realist. They want to know details. They want to know information. They want financial security based off of the things that they've grown up with. Both generations are very fast paced. We're used to change, almost thrive on change. So, the best way to really engage a Gen Z or a millennial is to show a pathway to promotion. So, three ways to do that, in my experience, and I know Jessica, you could probably color on a lot of this as well, is one cross functional experience. So, when you have an individual on your team, to be able to open up job opportunities within other departments, other projects to really help them get a sense of this diverse workload. I know I mentioned in my personal career path being a part of the diversity council early on in my career, and that has shaped a huge part of my own career path and passion, right? And that was probably only 5 to 10% of my job at the time. So when you look at your talent pool, how can you help diversify their skill sets and their passions by giving some cross-functional opportunities, whether it's employee resource groups or again, just being on short-term projects with other teams. The second is learning and development. Again, I know Jessica mentioned this as well in recruiting that this is something they're going to ask for. How do you continue to create paths around learning and development, training programs, investing in this generation? I know that when we hit some economic hard times, it's really easy to cut back on training and promotion, but there is really some smart and really good ways to do this. Even LinkedIn Learning, right? Being able to create time and space for individuals. This is a generation that is a self-starter. And I have met numerous candidates and talent pool applicants who have just gotten their own certificates, right? That they go on and just learn on their own. So it's a huge self-starting learning part of the way that they like to work and operate. And last but not least is mentorship. So, how can we create and cultivate a sense of mentorship for this generation? Being providing that safe space where they can have courageous conversations with someone who might not be on their team, might not even work at their organization. And this can also be promoted as cross functional and two-way mentorship. So, one being mentored as a Gen Z or millennial, but also our baby boomers and our Gen X really learning and gathering insight from them. So, really, the mentorship can be two ways.
I love that, and you took the words right out of my mouth, Amber. I had mentorship was one of the top ones for me, as far as even that professional growth and the development piece, as well as the cross-functional exposure. Because just like you mentioned with my career, I have so many of my peers ask me constantly, how did you get to where you are? How did you get to this role? How did you do this? And honestly, it was that cross-functional exposure. And I've stayed with the company I'm at for as long as I have now because of the opportunities that presented itself. And you be surprised with how many organizations don't allow for that kind of cross-functional crossover. So, you have your role and that's your position and you're that's what you do. And there's no kind of room for exploring other areas or departments or functions. And so I think that's really important in what these newer generations are looking for because it's not just that one thing that they're looking at anymore. It's like how can I upskill? How can I enhance my talents and expose myself to other parts of the business so that I become a subject matter expert, not just on one thing, but on a number of things so that I am the one that folks call on when they need X, Y, and Z. So having that cross-functional exposure is really, really important. And it also exposes you to other leaders within the organization. So utilizing those senior leaders and folks like you touched on mentorship, just having those different diversity of thought across the different generations and being able to learn not only from the older generations, but the younger generations as well. There's something that can be bridged across both parts. So I think, enabling all of those opportunities throughout the career process is really, really important in what folks are asking about in interviews. How can I learn and develop in your organization? What mentorship programs do you have available? What's your diversity and inclusion strategies? How do you encourage those thoughts in your daily practices? So they're asking these questions, and so it's going to be necessary to be ahead of the game and already have those things in place to appeal to those newer generations.
No, Jessica, I completely agree. And I'm glad that you said that as well in terms of long term engagement at an organization. And I think there's always been this perceptions of millennial and Gen Z wanting to job hop, right? But I think
Right.
at the end of the day, it's creating this curiosity and these opportunities within the current organization. I think
Absolutely.
I heard a stat that the average Gen Z or millennial stays in a role an average of 1 to 2 years. Which can sound scary, I think, to certain, in certain ways as an organization, but how valuable to have and grow a talent pool that is able to touch on so many different projects and build skill sets. And sometimes it's not even moving vertically, right? It can even move laterally. Like this
Right.
generation is also very curious and open-handed and wants to just have new experiences and new exposures and new teams. So I think building upon that creates even more assets for the organization. It's just being open and creating a pipeline that enables both hiring managers, leaders and employees to do this well and strategically, right? To bring back to the business and bring that profitability back into the organization.
Yeah, I mean, you guys touched on so many things there. I love the idea of knowledge sharing both ways, right? There's a lot that those who are more established in their career, have been around longer, have that they can pour into this upcoming generation. Absolutely. But there's also that technology shift, those different perspectives, that gig economy, entrepreneurship, tech savviness that you're mentioning that could also be a benefit the other way, right? And I think what's exciting exciting is we talk a lot too at Culturefy about technology and AI technology, and there's so much technology there that can help organizations tap into everything that you guys just mentioned, and especially I think with global organizations, hybrid organizations, remote organizations, how do you bring people together for all of those touch points, whether it's, employee resource groups, whether it's mentorship programs. There's so much technology out there that really facilitate that and help make that so much easier and really help empower employees, right? So that they can be finding what learning development programs exist that maybe tap into another skill that may or may not be with their current role, but it's something that they want to grow and develop in. And so having technology and platforms that can help recommend training courses to help them grow in other areas for that holistic professional development, learning development that you're thinking that you guys are talking about, I think can be super, super powerful and really help alleviate some of the weight of organizations that are like, I want to do all of this, but how do I get started? And, how do we're a small team. How do I manage a mentorship program? How do I support all of our ERGs? What does that look like? And so I think tapping into some of those resources and platforms out there can really help move the needle in this way to tap into everything that you guys are talking about. Well, I want to dive in a little bit, Jessica. So you mentioned just the priority on how do you really help bring diverse voices and ideas and thoughts to the table. So can you dive a little bit more into that from what you have seen, what you've experienced, what you're hearing in this space around how organizations can really help bring that to the focus of some of their efforts?
Absolutely. So, diversity and inclusion is obviously a hot topic these days. It's on the top of everyone's minds across generations. And everyone's trying to figure out how to, best strategize D&I and bring it to the forefront and prioritize it in today's ever-changing economy and how things are constantly changing. So I think one of the biggest things that I think companies can do and what we have done very well at is, and we've talked about ERGs or BRGs as we call them, employee resource groups or business resource groups. I think that's the biggest thing that companies can do to really drive that diversity of thought and embrace the different cultures and generations and viewpoints that folks have into the organization's structure. So if you have all of these different people that you are working with day in day out and you have similarities and differences, just imagine the types of change that you can bring into the workplace if you incorporate those views and those things into the strategies. And one thing that I really love about our business resource groups is, what you mentioned, we're a small team for a global company, and so we have over 200 chapters, and this is worldwide. So we obviously, our small team can't do everything to drive diversity and inclusion throughout that organization. So we really rely on those BRG leaders and those chapters to really move the needle and help have those conversations, implement those programs, have those mentorship programs throughout their regions and districts and business units. And we help, support them in those efforts. But it really is something that I think is a huge benefit for people coming into your organization, and they see that the culture is at the forefront, and these are culture carriers. The employees are the ones that are actually pushing, and the word of mouth piece you touched on, Amber, having those conversations and increasing that likelihood to recommend your organization. It's all, I think, can be driven by the benefits of employee resource groups and business resource groups. So I really think that that's one huge way that companies can start there. It doesn't have to be a huge number of groups or chapters. It could just start out with one, and just expand from there, because you'd be surprised with how many employees want to have that sense of belonging and have that area and space within. We're at our jobs more than we're at home sometimes. We're engaging with each other more than we do with some family members at that. So why would you not want your workplace to be a place where you feel like you belong, and that your culture is celebrated and your thoughts are valued? So I think that that's just one really, kind of easy way to start there, and really find a impactful way to move the needle in that space.
That's awesome, Jessica. And I agree. I agree about employee resource groups and the power of that around just even the community element, right? So we've become, since COVID, a more siloed culture in general, right? Like there's more remote. How do you build authentic relationships and creating space around a women's ERG or a next generation ERG? And just there's so many. I know you mentioned you have 200 chapters all together. And what I have loved from a personal experience in employee resource groups, I've helped lead a next generation employee resource group. But what I've loved is that there were leaders who not necessarily fit into that script of the target audience of that group, but that led individuals who were part of that group, or had children who would one day be part of that group and said, I really want to learn more. I have this in all elements of my life, both personally and professionally, and I want to understand how this generation thinks and how I can be an advocate and really champion this group. And so what I just love is the authentic relationships and the inclusion within each of these employee resource groups as a way to build that community and that expertise. So agreed.
And I just want to add on to that too. I didn't mention, but even with the employee resource groups, but also getting the leadership involved, so that, from the top, you can see that it is a priority for the organization, because it's one thing to have your employees out in their communities and really pushing the conversation, but it really is impactful if you have the senior leadership, your EVPs, your CEOs included in on those conversations and seeing the work that's been done, because then it shows that this is not just a priority for your employees, but it's an employee for the top of the house as well. And one other thing I want to mention too is just on the D&I conversation, because you touched on it as well, Amber, is that transparency piece. In my role, I focus on workforce representation and data analytics. And so I think also even communicating the areas of opportunity and how your employees can help move that needle is important too. You want to see yourself in some of those leadership roles. And if you don't see yourself, it's kind of hard to feel like you can get there. How can you get there if you don't look? So it's important to have those conversations and have that transparency around what the workforce looks like, and how you can create those areas of opportunity to show that representation and build on that representation across the board, so that, again, others coming in the newer generations can see, oh, wait, I can be that. I can do that. This is a priority for this company. That stands out to me, and that makes them, feel valued and want to continue on that journey with your organization. So I just wanted to hit on that too as well.
Yeah, it reminds me, a couple weeks ago we talked about trust, and so seeing the mission, vision, and values in an organization and their brand, and seeing that lived out in their culture, that absolutely helps to build trust, right? And as you can see things changing, or some of the priorities that are being voiced from your people, as you see that incorporated into the culture and actually action being taken on those things, I think it definitely builds trust and helps to with those brand ambassadors, helps new employees who are joining the team really say, okay, this is actually what everyone's talking about. It's actually lived out in practice. And I think, there is a lot around the brand ambassador aspect that I think, Amber, you mentioned before that we don't always think about, right? Word of mouth goes far. And more, we're seeing that there is, the power of internal quote unquote brand ambassadors. So as people see and are a part of cultures that they love and that represent things that matter to them and that really align with the brand, it's easy to go out and say, oh yeah, I work here. I love what they're all about. It's not just a buzzword, right? It's actually something that is lived and breathes in the company culture. And I think there's a huge power in that. And sometimes it takes just a little bit of intentionality to kind of help some of those things that are really priorities. And I think sometimes we hear a lot about, well, where do we get started? I don't know what the priorities are, or maybe I don't have a ton of this generation in my workforce. So, some of the things that we talk about at Culturefy is just reaching out, from your HR teams and a quick survey, a quick question, bringing people together to find out what those priorities are. But I'd love to just toss it out to you guys. If somebody's saying, well, how do I find out exactly what those priorities are for my people? What are some ways that they can maybe get started with that?
Yeah, great question. I would echo the sentiment around the surveys. I know that in the past that's been a huge piece. And Jessica, hit on earlier around ERGs to get the leadership involved. And I think that when we think about surveys, it's all good and well to send in a survey, but I think you have to see actionable, tangible change within an organization, and you will build such significant trust with your workforce when you see this being talked about and when you see change actually being implemented and policy shifts to just, again, building that trust is huge. And I completely agree. And just also wanted to hit on, Kristen, the branding topic just one more time from like a bigger picture around just how powerful the word of mouth is for this generation, Gen Z, especially millennials as well. It's like when we shop on Amazon, right? A brand can promote their product, but I'm looking in the reviews in Amazon, right? So it's kind of the same way when people are looking for a job. We can go to the website, it can be beautiful, it can say all the right things, but we want to dig in and see what the employees are actually saying, and what someone who works there, how they actually feel about it. So I think never underestimate that power. And encouraging your generations to be social, to promote experiences that they can and want to post on LinkedIn or want to post on their TikTok maybe, or their Instagram, and tag the organization. That drives a lot of power and a lot of influence. And that's really going to create just not only for your talent, but also for your products, right? So it goes both ways.
Absolutely. I think there's so much there. And sometimes we get a little bit nervous with the social media side of things, but there's so much power there. And if we're authentically representing our brand and our culture, I mean, some of that happens so naturally. And so that's something I think is really exciting to see, and to see organizations really step into and see those changes happening. So I want to talk a little bit about work-life balance, work-life harmony. You guys both mentioned that as a priority. And I would really love to kind of dig into really what are you seeing organizations implement here? What does that look like for these upcoming generations? And how do you measure the effectiveness? There's a ton to unpack there, so I just kind of want to toss that out to you both, and let's dive into this aspect of the conversation.
Sure, I can kick us off. And then Jessica, I know you probably have some great perspectives as well. So when I think about work-life balance, which a previous leader of mine actually coined it life-work balance. So putting life at the forefront, just again, really changing that overall mindset, especially for these generations. But when I think about statistics that I know to be shared during COVID, I think there was 70 to 80%, if I remember correctly, companies worldwide reported burnout with their employees, right? And that was because it was this huge shift where suddenly our personal life and our work life were tied together in a way that we had not experienced before. I just think about early on in my career, especially, pre-COVID, you'd go into an office 8 to 5, and when you were at work, you were at work. And when you were not at work, you weren't necessarily at work. Maybe you'd have your cell phone. But again, there was this greater separation. And this new generation, this Gen Z that is coming into the workforce, is really being tasked with, how do I create and cultivate a sense of differentiating between my life and my work? And I think that we're the most connected than we've ever been. And so it's really hard to shut that off. So all I'm really saying is I think that this is something that's ever evolving as organizations, and we're continuously trying to figure this out. I know for my current organization, we're global, we're hybrid, and again, we're very remote focused as well in certain instances. So for us, it's really thinking through how do you create, and we span time zones. So I know I've had experiences where I'm talking to colleagues in Europe and China. I sit on the East Coast of the United States, and a lot of my leadership team is on the West Coast. So how do you create those expectations? So one thing that I would recommend, whether you're hybrid, whether you're remote, whether you're in person, I know Jessica will probably be able to talk about a little bit of that more, is just creating conversations around the topic and setting realistic expectations. It's all about expectation setting at this point, because the traditional 8 to 5, I think, is kind of out the window. And so really setting expectations for your team of when you're all online to create those collaborative team building moments, when you're going to be available for meetings and when you're not. And then also expectations around when do you get the work done. I know something about this generation. It's not about the workload per se, but the flexibility to get the work done when it's convenient and optimal for them. And that they see it as a lot more flexible, and wanting just, to be able to have that. But also as managers, we want to be able to know when we can contact our people when they're going to be available, right? So that's why it comes back to that overall consistency around expectation setting. And something else too that our team, again, when you span multiple time zones across the world, is thinking through, okay, can this meeting be recorded so that if someone doesn't have to take a call at 10, 11 o'clock at night if they're across the world, right? And they can listen to it the next day and chime in with their thoughts and suggestions. So just a little more technology and creativity, and how do we cultivate this life work balance while still not feeling like you're missing out or not having a voice at the table. And then again, just transparency. If I have a call with a colleague in Asia, one of us might need to be at night, and so we switch off, right? And just being really transparent about the expectations of that, and just being willing to just collaborate when it comes to that. And then the last thing that I'll say is a very repetitive theme, and then Jessica, I'll toss it over to you. I know we've said this, I think, twice already in this conversation, is modeled through by the leadership. So our leadership team can say all day long, we want life work balance. This is, we don't have these expectations, but if our leadership is continuing to not demonstrate their own life work balance, it can create tension in the organization and anxiety, especially for this new generation of expectations of being available 24/7. So just being thoughtful to allow our leaders a space that they can demonstrate that well, from their standpoint, and the rest of the organization will follow. Just being thoughtful. I know that we've even done tactics around, you can set an email to be sent the next day. So if you want to work at night, you can write the email and it can send first thing in the morning. So it doesn't alert anyone at night. Or I know for myself, I'm very aware of my colleagues on the West Coast. I sit in Atlanta on the East Coast, of not pinging them too early on Teams, just to be aware of that time zone difference, and just a little bit more awareness than I think we've ever had to demonstrate before. So, but Jessica, I'd be curious your thoughts. I know that there's more in-person work being done at UPS, especially here in Atlanta. So would be curious on your take as well.
Absolutely. And I actually agree with a lot of, excuse me, those points that you mentioned already, because I feel like it goes hand in hand with both, remote work, hybrid, and in person, but that communication, flexibility, and transparency is key. I think communicating the needs. So, for instance, as most of you know, if you don't know, we are going back to a full in-office experience from being on a hybrid schedule, which comes with its pros and cons, And so, with that being said, it's going to take a lot of adjustment and communication and transparency. To your point, for me in general, I'll just use a personal experience. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I'm a mom of three, so young children at that. I have an almost 8-year-old, 2-year-old, and a baby. So My day to day definitely changes and fluctuates as it goes. So that work life balance, having, and I love how you put life work balance, with life at the forefront. I think is awesome way to put that, and I'm going to use that from here on out because I love that. But I think it's really important in communicating what I've always done, even with our team, is just communicating my needs. And to your point, the hours that, if it makes more sense for me to get in the office early, head home earlier, that's what I can do, and that's what I communicate to my team, and just setting those standards of when the work is getting done, and meeting those deadlines and those goals. You don't want to fall short on that, but at the same time communicating what is expected. And even at the beginning, if you've just stepped into a role, setting those expectations up front, I think also provides that sense of trust as well, because you don't want to expect something and then you get in the role and it's extremely different than what you expected coming in. So I think setting the stage, and the standard early on in that process, and um, being transparent and communicating what's expected is important. But as far as, being back in the office, like I said, it comes with its pros and cons, but it's going to be an adjustment as well, especially for this newer generation that really thrives on that flexibility. But you'd be surprised too, as many folks really want that in-person experience and do feel isolated sometimes being remote. We have a team that is in office, and we have a team member that's fully remote as well. So it's definitely an adjustment to kind of figure out how to engage and really drive performance and enhance, that want to show up every day with your best self when it may not be the most ideal environment that you came into. So finding companies are going to have to find ways to appeal to these employees, and whether that be, well-being is a huge topic, mental health. So finding ways that you can really, touch on those pieces and make it, impactful. Like I've seen companies implement quiet rooms or prayer rooms, meditation rooms, in the workplace, so that if you need to step away for a moment and have some time, you have an area and a space in the office to do that. Because when you're at home, you can go in your room and shut the door, you can log off, you can shut your computer, but when you're in the office, it's kind of hard to take that mental break. Or if you have anxiety or things like that, how do you navigate? So having a work environment, even in the office, that supports those areas, and being vulnerable enough to explain what you're going through with your leadership, and having that sense of trust, I think is very important, and what will make you feel valued as an employee. Because we have this saying at work that's like, it's okay to not be okay. So if you are showing up to work and you're coming in the office, you may have had a screaming toddler and a hit traffic, and it's just your day is starting off horrible, but you have to be in the office, you have to be in your A game. How can your environment and how can your workplace show up for you and support you in that area? So being creative, and finding ways to, make people want to show up every day as their best selves are going to be really important. And we're doing that now as we're stepping into this new chapter and this new environment. What can we do to support employees coming back into the office? What can we do to make the environment comfortable and fun and engaging? What opportunities can we set up that are in person, and whether that be lunch and learns or coffee chats, or have different things that are exciting that these generations want to have. We touched on it with the professional growth and development pieces, but having those sessions where you can come and sit in a room with with other like-minded individuals that are wanting to grow their careers as well, and networking sessions. There's tons of things that can be implemented in person, in an in-person environment, and as well as a virtual environment as well. You can do those networking sessions on Zoom. You can have these panel discussions on Teams and Zooms like we're having now, to spark those conversations. But just finding ways to connect. I think the connection piece is a big thing to really hone in and focus on, because every aspect, hybrid, remote, and in person, all will thrive off of the connection. So how can you really find ways to connect with your team, connect with your peers and really make them feel valued and engaged are going to be key. So yeah, it's definitely a lot that I could say on this topic for sure. I feel like we could go on for a while about the work life balance. But yeah, it's definitely an adjustment and a hot topic these days for sure.
Oh my gosh, I love, Jessica, that you brought that up around ways to engage, and how do you continue to engage performance within this new workforce that we're all living in. And you're right. I know that I read in the Harvard Business Review that among workers 18 to 22, 73% report sometimes or always feeling alone, because the Gen Z employees have always experienced remote or hybrid ways of life, and they haven't had as many opportunities to forge deep professional relationships that we've all had the chance to cultivate over a period of time. So, how do we continue to reinfuse that into the workforce, like you just said? And if you are remote, can you find ways to bring your employees together, like you said, for those coffee chats or maybe a state of the business update, or an employee resource group? So how do you create authentic connection, that human connection? It's really easy in this current workforce, when we have so much technology, for work to feel more transactional than it's ever been. But I know also, I remember a previous leader of mine saying that someone is more likely to stay. This isn't even just this generation, when you have a best friend at work. And so, how do you create friendships and authentic relationships? Again, we spend so much time at work. So, how do we provide opportunities to do that? And again, just building that trust within the organization, and especially with this next generation. You brought it up again, Jessica. Transparency is key. Building trust is key. Even if things are not going well for an organization, this generation does not want things sugar coated. They want to know the truth. They're just information seeking. We're used to having more information than we've ever had. And so this, having that information and those personal connections, is going to help alleviate some of the stress. I think Gen Z is also one of the more stressed out generations, because they've been brought up in such a digital environment with more information at their fingertips than ever before. So how do we create safe spaces, like you said, yoga rooms? Mental health is absolutely key. And I know we can talk about that too, Kristen, in terms of talent practices and implementing things, but I think mental health is also at the forefront than ever before of how do we continue to reach and engage this generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, fun fact for those who maybe this is their first roundtable with us at Culturefy, we just had a roundtable discussion fully focused on well-being and mental health, and what does that look like, and how organizations are stepping into that to support their workforce of all generations. So if you have more questions on that, be sure to check it out on our website. We have an on-demand link for that, because as you said, Jessica, Amber, there's so much more that we could cover in all of these. And I do think, it's about organizations are recognizing that we're supporting the holistic person, right? We don't just shut off our personal life when we step through the doors of our office, or we connect online. And so how do we support and make a safe space for people to show up authentically, but still have the clear expectations, clear priorities, so that there is a level of engagement and performance that needs to happen to move the needle in our organizations. And so finding that balance is really a priority as we move into this year. And I do just want to plug, as we are getting close to the end of our time, for those who are joining online, I would love to hear what's working for you guys in these spaces. We've covered a ton. So if there's anything that is really working, that you're seeing working in your organization, please drop it into the chat. It definitely sounds like that connection piece is really resonating with those who are tuning in online. And again, I will say, at Culturefy, we talk a lot about work-life culture. And so that our cultures have to integrate our work and our life and our culture, where we come from, our life experiences. We bring all of these things. And through some of these things that we've been able to talk about, the resource groups, mentoring, connection points, we can really support people and bring together diverse perspectives, views, voices to really strengthen our teams. And then the last thing that I will say on this is, sometimes I think we talk about culture and we think it has to look the exact same across organizations, but that is absolutely not the case. And so by fusing your brand and your organizational culture together, you're able to really create unique cultures that accurately represent your brand's mission, vision, and values and support the unique people who are showing up and taking part and shaping your organizations. So I think that's what gets us excited as we see more and more the unique ways that organizations are shaping cultures and really creating brands that resonate with Gen Z and millennials in a way that aligns authentically with their mission, vision, and values. So again, so please jump in and add your thoughts and examples of what's working as we wrap up in the last few minutes. But I do want to kind of looking ahead, kind of think about, so what does all of this mean? So kind of bring it all together. We talked about a ton of things. But so what does all of this mean when it comes to shaping the future of HR practices? And maybe Amber, I'll kick it off with you. And then Jessica, you can close us with some of your thoughts on this topic.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I know we covered a lot today. So to kind of summarize just some of the things that we talked about and ways that this could impact HR and just certain talent processes. Again, we talked about the greater focus on mental health. We just covered that. Something else I know we didn't touch on quite as much, but that is really important to these generations is the connection to the greater good, to be missional mindset. Is there sustainability? Is there diversity? Can I do volunteering within my organization? So volunteering days are huge. So being able to allocate that or create synergies around your employee base around a common theme, or empowering them to go find something that they love outside of work and giving them the time off to be able to go do that will go a really, really long way and is a key benefit for this generation. Again, flexible work environment, we covered that. Enabling technology. Can they have a phone call can they call in from their mobile device and have the ability to travel or be a little bit offsite in order to accomplish work in the time frame that makes the most sense for them? Something that we're also seeing is gone are really the days of the the mid-year and end of year big long reviews. We're looking at quick feedback with this organization. So quarterly check-ins. How do we create ongoing feedback? And again, that will help create that engagement around, I know I'm cared for and there's a vested interest in my success. So this generation really doesn't shy away from critical feedback. In fact, providing that on an ongoing and transparent basis will actually create a sense of engagement versus having one or two check-in points throughout the year with long drawn out conversations. Quick, it can even be casual. Hey, let's go grab a quick cup of coffee and do a developmental conversation. So how are we checking in on this generation? Again, self-assessments and really identifying the career path for this generation. Hey, what are you passionate about? Where are your skills? How can we get you there? What development opportunities or mentorship programs can we get you in to really drive you to where you want to go and create constant curiosity and constant growth? And again, just kind of closing out with that cross-functional and goal setting. So making sure that those are at the forefront of the conversation. And just bringing back the human connection. That's my own personal thought around this, is how do we continue to cultivate that human touch within our workforce while we become more technologically advanced. AI, which we didn't even discuss at all on this podcast. Kristen, I'm sure you're going to have a podcast specifically around that. But how do we continue to cultivate that human connection? Because we know that that's the stickiness of any organization, any product, and any employee culture. So those are my thoughts. But Jessica, feel free to fill in some of the gaps or anything else that I might have missed.
Yeah, I echo everything that you said, and I won't repeat any of that because I think it sticks and it was great points. The one things I will add is just the connection piece and just reinforcing that, because human resources, the human connection, let's put the human connection back into it, as well as, we didn't touch on it at all, the AI and technology piece, but there's a lot of old processes and old ways in HR that I feel like are still being used across different organizations. And some folks are scared to step away from and embrace those new technologies because it's always been done, or it's, but these newer generations are going to come in and they're going to rip those old processes to pieces and show them up. So already being ahead of the curve and stepping into a lot of these new technologies and new platforms and new ways of doing things that can help streamline processes and help make things a lot more seamless, I think are going to really be what you know, engages these newer generations. So I would say that, and then the connection piece, and then just, going back to, as I work in DE&I, just the diversity and inclusion piece, and finding ways to push that, whatever your D&I strategy is for your organization, through your H&R processes and through the company's different departments and things like that. Just always, communicating that and bringing leadership in to be those DEI champions throughout the organization will really help that human connection piece as well. So I echo everything Amber said. I don't have anything, I think, outside of that to add, because we touched on so much. And like I said, we could go even longer on a lot of these different things. So for the sake of time, I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I mean, we just really scratched the surface. And I do think, there's so much more to say about the AI technology. And I think the exciting thing, especially with this upcoming generation, is leveraging AI to be better, faster, smarter, so that they can focus on the things that really excite them. So not only are you you're getting peak performance, but you're also getting excited employees because they're able to really dive into that professional growth that you're talking about, leveraging their unique interests, their shape, again, that holistic piece. And again, at Culturefy, we talk a lot about work-life culture, where culture is really the balance, right? The organizational culture is finding the balance between work and life. And that's what I think all these organizations, all organizations are trying to do, is what is that? How do we build a culture that balances work and life for our people and still moves our organizations forward in the way that they need to be moved forward? And so I think there's so much here. It's really exciting, as we think about having 6 generations in the workforce coming up. I think there's so much opportunity to really just enrichen our brands and our cultures in a way that really attracts this generation, attracts, retains, and empowers them to really move the needle in ways that we're hoping to see in organizations. And so I just thank you guys so much for your time and for all of the amazing insights that you brought to the table. And I'll say quickly, so at Culturefy, we do offer a lot of solutions that help in moving the needle in a lot of these areas around shaping culture, empowering your people, bringing together the generations through leveraging AI technology. So if anyone is interested or has questions and wants to learn more, we would love to hear more about your specific challenges that you're facing in your organization. So please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to me at kristen.boyd@culturefy.com. And to our wonderful panelists, thank you guys so much for being here. We are going to drop their LinkedIn in the chat, so please reach out to them. Our hope with this series is really also to provide a way of connecting, knowledge sharing, everything that we were talking about, that Amber and Jessica were talking about bringing ideas together, perspectives, different generations. We're hoping to do a little bit of that each week here as we bring in thought leaders to unpack different topics. So please be sure to join us again next time. But thank you so much, Amber and Jessica, for your time this week. And then coming up, again, we are here every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And so next week, be sure to join us if you have any interest in unpacking, learning more about how do we weave inclusion into the very fabric of your brand. So going a little bit deeper into all of the nuggets that Jessica was dropping today. We're going to focus an entire conversation around that next week. So please come back for that, about how inclusion and diversity really help empower and increase overall employee engagement. So if you're looking for actionable strategies on how to raise the bar in that area of your organizational culture, please don't miss this conversation next week. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you again to our panelists, and we will see you guys next time.